Michelle Ortiz, Michelle Angela Ortiz. Thank you for joining us for the filmmaking and the Carceral State panel produced by Black Star for the 2021 Sundance Film Festival's Beyond Film program. Our conversation today will be focused on the ethics and challenges and significance of making work about folks who are either currently or formerly incarcerated and who are working within the carceral system as well. As I mentioned, my name is Michelle. I am a visual artist and a filmmaker based here in Philadelphia, and I'll be moderating the conversation today. I'm so excited to open the space with these amazing filmmakers. I've seen each one of their films, and it's just been amazing just to see all of the stories that have unfolded and all the amazing connections and necessary work of producing and amplifying these stories. We have Cristina Ibarra, we have Elle Sawyer, Steve Mang, Ted Passon, who actually the first 2 episodes of his film, A Philly DA, is premiering at Sundance tomorrow, February 2nd, and you'll be able to check out those first 2 episodes. And Tommy Oliver will also be joining us later in our conversation. So I just wanted to open the space with each one of the filmmakers. If you can please share your name, the name of your film, what is the story that you are amplifying in your film, and share briefly, what is the importance of telling this particular story?
So should I start?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm Cristina Ibarra, and I'm one of the directors and producers of The Infiltrators. I collaborated with Alex Rivera to tell this story. This story set during the Obama administration, and it follows these young activists who want to stop deportations. They are undocumented themselves, but they decide that the best way to stop deportations is by going inside of an immigration detention center. And they do that by getting themselves arrested by Border Patrol on purpose. They infiltrate the detention center. They collaborate with Claudio Rojas inside, and they manage to stop deportations. Then they also, they don't stop all of them. They manage to stop some of them, but then also they have to figure out how to get themselves released. And so, yeah, so that's the story. It was, it's now a couple years old.
Great. Tommy, you just joined us. I just introduced myself as the moderator for the conversation. Thanks for joining us. We're asking folks right now to share their name, the name of their film, what is the story that they're amplifying, and so we're sharing that each. So if you could go next, or someone else could go next.
You.
Go ahead.
Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited. My name is Tommy Oliver, and I'm the director, producer of 40 Years a Prisoner, which is a story about what happened to a group called MOVE in 1978. And there are so many things that happen in so much of our history that is often forgotten. And in 1978, after years of back and forth between the city of Philadelphia and MOVE, the city sieged on their compound. There were a number of MOVE members who were in the basement, and they tried to force them out. And at one point, a cop who was above ground, MOVE was beneath ground, a cop was shot from a bullet going down and behind. And so they're subsequently forced out. One MOVE member is beaten until within an inch of his life. The other 9 MOVE members are taken out. One's 8.5 months pregnant. The father's also in there. She winds up delivering her baby and literally in a prison cell. So that's half the story. The lead up to this event, and then the aftermath. The other half cuts to about 30 years later or so, and that kid has committed to getting his parents out of prison because they were subsequently sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. And Mike Africa Jr. has committed his entire life to getting his family out. So that's 40 Years a Prisoner.
Thank you, Tommy. It's such a beautiful film, and it's also so deeply connected to Philly history, being a native Philadelphian, and to see that it's heart-wrenching, and also just the love that is present in the family is just really amazing to see.
It really is. They're incredible people.
So we're going to move on with Elle. Would you like to share? Oh, I can't hear you. Got to unmute yourself.
That might be necessary.
Yeah.
Hello, Michelle. How are you? How's everybody?
Good, good.
The questions is my name and then the name of the film and the voices, or excuse me, the what?
Oh, the story that you're amplifying in your film. Mm-hmm.
So my name is Elle Sawyer. I am a filmmaker, and the film is Pool of Gravity. And this film, like Christina said, I think it was Christina that said it was a number of years old. So this is, a couple years. It was completed a couple years ago. But we always look at this film, and I co-directed this film with my partner and best friend John Kaufman. We see this film as being a sort of I don't know, very, very timeless piece, and very necessary, not just to see here in Philadelphia in the U.S., but we've now shown it in different parts of the world. The film basically, Pull of Gravity, follows three people, one of which is me, in different stages of returning home from prison. I did 8 years in prison, was sentenced to 8 to 20 years, and all coming back to basically the same neighborhood in North Philly. That's the film. So it was shot over basically over a 2-year period of time. And we look at this film as a sort of memorial because, to date, so many people that we documented in that film, which is very dear, close friends of ours, has subsequently been killed as a result of not just going to prison, but in the causes of which, but the environment as well. So I guess what I'm stuttering just to say, just kind of trying to go back to your original question, sort of the message or the sort of message that we're trying to amplify with Pool of Gravity was less, not less or more, but it was about people returning home from prison, but it was returning home, to where, right? The thought is that in the film, there's three sort of main characters, if you will, but the fourth character is the environment. So what we're trying to amplify or speak to is the conditions in which people, are coming home to. That I think gets missed in the whole thought about, someone's coming home from prison and they, went back to prison or came home and didn't get themselves together or what have you, or even went to prison to start with. Again, just building out the environment in which people are coming home to. And I'm gonna leave it there, but yeah, that's what it is.
Thank you, Elle. I think for both films, for The Infiltrators and Pull of Gravity, like there's, even though both of you are like, we did this so many years ago, it's still so relevant today, right? And so I think that that's the beauty of both of the films and just how it connects to the continued fight against mass incarceration and also the impact that it has on neighborhoods and specifically on undocumented communities in The Infiltrators film. So can we move on to Steve?
Hi, really appreciate the chance to be part of this conversation with such an incredible group of filmmakers and artists. So thank you for doing this. So I'm Steve Meng. My film is Crime and Punishment, which also came out a few years ago. It's an observational look at aggressive over-policing in Black and Brown communities in New York City, told through this group of active duty minority whistleblower cops. We embedded for about 4 years as they set out to expose the NYPD's corruption and discriminatory practices through a class action lawsuit. The film unfolds in real time, and it's also told from the perspective of communities that are being that these cops are being pressured to target. So, such as like the story of a young man who's been awaiting trial for over a year in Rikers for a crime he had absolutely nothing to do with. That young man was also arrested 13 times for crimes he never committed in the Bronx. But I guess of the many issues that come up, you know, the use of quotas, use of force, violence against communities of colors, I really wanted people, you know, to have a chance to break through the blue wall of silence with these cops as they were risking career and life to expose the rot and corruption that exists within contemporary policing today, and more importantly, have this kind of visceral experience about how this problem is not about individual racist cops, individual bad apples, or individual prosecutors, but it's rather this very interconnected systemic problem that we are facing.
Thank you, Steve. Ted, can you please share?
Sure. So yeah, my project is called Philly DA. It's a multi-part documentary series, and it follows the story of Larry Krasner, who is a civil rights attorney in Philadelphia. He represented everybody from Black Lives Matter to ACT UP to Occupy. He was kind of like the go-to activist lawyer. And he spent his entire career fighting the district attorney's office, and he was a very vocal opponent of them. And then in 2017, our district attorney was indicted on corruption charges. And then suddenly there was an opening for the job. And all these people threw their hat into the ring for the election, and Larry was one of them. And when we first heard that, it seemed, you know, hilarious. It just seemed like a stunt. It just seemed like there's no way that he would ever have a chance of winning, but it's interesting that he's using it to try to change the conversation. And he ran on a platform of trying to use the office of the district attorney to try to help end mass incarceration. And so we started filming during the election, and to our shock and surprise, as to the shock and surprise of everybody in Philadelphia, he won. And so then the real story became, okay, well, what now? Are you actually going to be able to do this? You know, can all these people who are, you know, him and everybody he was bringing in to the office were all outsiders to government, all outsiders to prosecution. And, you know, we wanted to see, like, is it possible to make change from the inside? Can you actually do that? What does it look like? What does it take? You know, can we try to see that in real time? And so we embedded essentially inside the district attorney's office from day one for the next like 2 or 3 years to kind of follow this experiment and see if they're going to be able to do this. And then, you know, as the story widens out in the series, you know, we kind of go from these like back rooms where they're making these decisions inside the DA's office to widening out, you know, and to being with people who their decisions are directly impacting, people who are directly impacted by the criminal justice system, other stakeholders, police officers, defense attorneys, city council. And the series is essentially like a portrait of a city going through the process of a really big change.
Thank you, Ted.
If I can, there's actually a really interesting intersection between our films, because
Yeah.
Larry
Yes.
Krasner plays into it, and so he pops up in the middle of my film where it's right after he won. And he ran on a platform of actually doing things differently than had been done in Philly for a very long time, against mass incarceration or over just all sorts of things. And so he was the first DA, because they had been sentenced, 9 of them had been sentenced to 30 to 100 years, and 2 of them had since died. And the other 7, they had been up for parole, probably at that point, somewhere between 6 and 8 times each. And they were all denied every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically the DA, he was opposed to each of them getting out. And Larry Krasner was the first person to actually recommend them for parole. And so without that change in the DA's office, I don't think it would have happened. And so there were a lot of things that had to happen, from the work they were doing inside, Mike Africa and his fight, the lawyers who were incredible, but that one piece, that external factor of Larry coming in and actually doing what he said as a DA made a huge difference.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see the Philly DA, and then also your film, Tommy, and see that connection with Krasner, and being a Philadelphian and just remembering also just his victory was just like, and to see that captured in the film just reminded me of all the people that were also supporting him and fighting for him, you know. So that was just a really amazing connection to see, around policies, around just the structure of our city, and the work that's still needed, right? Because we still have a long way to go. So I really want to, this conversation is really focused on filmmaking, and then we're filming not just individuals who are directly affected by the carceral system, but the system itself, and how corrupt, or how complicated or dense it can be, right? And so I just also want to just open the conversation around focusing on your process of ethics in the work as you're engaging with people affected by the system, and basically also shining light on the system itself. So particularly for Cristina and Steve, like I just remembering some of the folks that you were following in the stories, if you can share what are the risks and challenges of capturing and sharing these stories, specifically with people who are taking these risks, right? Are the truth tellers, are trying to either hack the system or find ways to dismantle it from the inside out, right? Could you share a little bit about what have been some of the risks and challenges of capturing these stories with the folks that you're following in your films? Cristina, if you would like to start.
Yeah, hi Michelle, thank you. It's great to be here with such amazing storytellers. It was great to hear everyone talk about their stories. And with us, we entered a very, I guess, sensitive power dynamic immediately just by deciding to tell the story, because we're not undocumented, Alex and I. And what we were seeing was this change in the immigrant rights movement, where visibility was really becoming the key to power, but it wasn't the same idea across the board for all immigrant rights activists. So these were really like people who were young, and they were, controversial. And so immediately, the question of visibility was one that was important in terms of safety. Like, are the people that we're interested in following, are they interested in being seen? Because here we are thinking about a community who lives in the shadows for the most part, especially during this time period. And now some of them want to be seen, not all of them. So it was really important for us to directly address that with each person that we were speaking to. Sometimes some people decided not to use their real name. And because of the way we tackled the creative challenge of also seeing a detention center that operates in the shadows as well, we ended up having to do this hybrid where we had scripted moments inside of the detention center that were based on the stories that we were being told by some of the people we were following. So the combination of having these questions around visibility and who wants to be seen, the ability to be able to cloak those identities in a way that isn't like this shadowing of the face, or like blurring it out. That's just, not very empowering. We really wanted to do something that involved the protagonists and other subjects in the storytelling process, but that also cared about their safety, in terms of like, is this part of your strategy? For the young people we were following, it was their strategy to be seen. That's what they wanted. Claudio Rojas, the protagonist inside of the detention center, who the young people found and started to collaborate with, he ended up adopting the same strategies, but it was, it was a process that he went through. And ultimately, the film premiered at Sundance a couple years ago, and soon after the premiere, the protagonist Claudio went in to do his regular check-in with ICE. But years before, for 7 years, he had been going in and coming out like after 5 minutes, just a routine check-in. This time he was detained. He didn't come out. And we've now been able to trace how it was a direct retaliation to him being in the film and speaking out. So this question of visibility again comes up, and it's just really challenging for us as filmmakers, because that was something that we were taking the lead from our protagonists, but yet they are choosing to put themselves in danger, and Claudio was essentially disappeared unconstitutionally. So right now what we're doing is trying to use the film to gain attention for his case, for the way that he was a part of this whistleblowing kind of strategy of calling the government out for abuses inside the detention center, and trying to bring him home. So right now, IDA and Sundance and many other organizations are asking the Biden administration on behalf of the filmmaking community to bring Claudio home. So there's this conversation around how this is impacting all of us as storytellers, because it's really creating this chilling effect where if you can't have the subject of your film speak out for fear of retaliation, then how will you be able to have a free conversation around what your themes are? So it's not just important for Claudio and his family, who of course are suffering through this, but I think this is an important free speech issue for all of us. But anyway, these are the ethics that we were tackling with and are still today still tackling with. It's like we're still living with the consequences of our decisions.
Thank you for sharing, Cristina. Yeah, I think that just seeing how Claudio's story is so important and relevant in your film, and important to hear and to see how he's been targeted specifically, and how that's also happened with so many other communities, right? Not even just through a film that has, gained amazing attention, right, around this issue, but just, the risk that it takes for someone who is specifically in an undocumented community speaking out, and how they can be targeted, and the risk is deportation. The risk is being separated from your family, and or being detained for an unknown amount of time. Steve, if thank you, Cristina. Steve, can you please share also just, again, the risk and challenges of capturing these stories? I know you had your specific group. They were still cops, and police officers, as they were speaking out against the quotas and the systems that they felt were unjust in their workplace, and they were also targeted. So can you speak to that in terms of your perspective around those risks and challenges and of capturing these stories?
Yeah, I really appreciate what Christina was just talking about, because I feel like we cannot be more concerned and too careful about these kinds of issues, about the dangers that our subjects expose themselves to. This idea of the risk of being silenced by the institutions that these individuals are pushing back against at great personal cost, but then the kind of the danger that awaits them by possibly being involved in the wrong kind of film, by a filmmaker who does not feel the full magnitude of what the individual is doing. All the cops and the families and community members that I filmed with in Crime and Punishment, one of their central feelings was this kind of the toll of being silenced, right, in their lives. And so they were all empowered by this need to be heard. And so you would think you can walk right through the door and start making your little film about that. But, this was a project that took over 7 years in total to develop, years and years of relationship building. We worked with, we're in touch with dozens of cops before we arrived at the central cops that became part of this historic class action lawsuit. And so for me, it was always the most important challenge was, how do we protect these individuals, right? Because these are cops who were already facing major threats of retaliation because of their beliefs, because of their convictions. And it's something that I think is hard for average citizens to really sink in, right? That you can believe in wanting to do the right thing, and yet your life, your career, your livelihood may be in danger. So this question of how to tell their story without further endangering them, always made me believe we have to follow their lead. You have to listen very closely to what all of the people around you are saying and their fears. And it was important to make sure we didn't rush to finish the film. You know, we work, unfortunately, in an industry that is shameless about expediency in filmmaking. I could have never made this one with one of the major streamers. They would have never, you know, during production, there's no streamer that would have said, hey, yeah, go ahead. It takes 7 years to sort of build trust and find the right way as far as you feel is to tell this. And so, you know, I always think of this as like, these are like stories of resistance because they always resist being told. And so there's this, you know, great challenge of like, how do you reverse, you know, like Christine is sort of talking about, like these historic erasures of experience, right? And find ways to capture these real-time experiences that I think the public needs in order to unlock their complacency. People, whether or not they care, they think they care, most people really are willing to let these issues sort of slide and not be bothered by them day to day because it's not their lived experience. And so, you know, it's interesting dilemma and challenge for us. Like, how do we create this lived experience cinematically, narratively, that allows people to live through what was once unfilmable? That's why I love Infiltrators so much, because you do that so powerfully, Christina. And so, like, you know, I guess just the top line for me is just like everything in documenting these kinds of stories is either an ethical or a visual dilemma with great risk involved. And so how do we make sure we're always making these like value-based decisions? How do we calibrate the risk management throughout the process? Just one really quick anecdote. When Pedro Hernandez, who was in Rikers for 13 months for a crime he didn't commit, was about to get out, I remember his mom saying, so, you know, just without very little notice, she was like, you know, we raised bail and we're going to get him out. Will you be there? And I was like, it took me like 5 months to get access for the 2 hours that we did the first time I went. There's no time. And she's like, are you going to tell our story or not? And so it was really her that kind of compelled me to feel like, all right, we're sneaking into Rikers with a camera without permission, and we're going to film this release because this is what the family actually wants. They want there to be a document of hope and perseverance in this film, and they were great collaborators. You know, they are our collaborators in this process. And so I remember being like scared shitless, but deciding, all right, I'm sneaking into Rikers and we're going to get that scene. And it turned out, actually, to her credit, Jessica Perez's credit, to me, the most moving scene I had the opportunity to capture.
Thank you for sharing that, Steve. I think for both of your films, it's just I'm in awe of the courage of the folks that are sharing their stories, the risks that are involved. And I think that it's so great to hear about following the lead of the person that is directly impacted by this issue, right? Because if you're not someone who has been incarcerated, is incarcerated, or has you know, is really directly affected by the conditions, then it is about acknowledging privilege and where you stand. And, you know, sometimes there's these perceptions of like, well, this is what I want the film to look like, but this is the reality of what we're facing with the people, the human beings that we want to share their stories, right? So I think it's really great to hear that, and for others to hear that in terms of the process. They see the final product and they don't necessarily understand all of those kind of questions and challenges that you face. So thank you both for sharing that. The next question is really actually directly for Elle. You are in your film, and I just wanted to see, you know, if you can share a little bit about, as someone who is directly affected by this issue, how has your experience influenced your ethical lens in presenting stories about incarceration, particularly in your film?
Well, thank you, and thank you both for you know, just mentioning about like your process. And I think your process was, you know, it's so many thoughts that just come up as y'all are talking, and it's just so refreshing, right? I don't know exactly what I thought I was about to walk into when you know, came on the link, but you know, and I don't think that's that, you know, my feelings and everything isn't necessarily off from from your question, Michelle. I think the, you know, if I rewind back, I think, you know, if I think about it, the process. So the process of making Pull of Gravity was sort of a flagship sort of piece for our company. Our company name is Media and Neighborhoods Group, or Ming. And we do this work. We basically looked at not only Pull of Gravity as a sort of flagship sort of model, but that model also is applied to, you know, marketing pieces for foundations or organizations or you know, branding or anything. And we keep that same sort of, so I don't look at filmmaking or even our process as a one-off anything. Right. And actually, I think filmmaking in, you know, early on, and even looking at Pull of Gravity or any film we do is sort of limiting. It's hugely limiting, right? The structure of filmmaking is largely limiting. And I feel like so much gets left, you know, as they say, on a, you know, on a editing room floor, right? And I feel like not enough attention is brought to the conversations that happen as a result of the film, right? You know, like these conversations where you're speaking about that process of sneaking the camera in the Rikers, or you know, all the concerns as a filmmaker, Christina, that you had, you know, with respect to, like, you know, is it, you know, is this okay for them to, not okay, but you know, is this the right play to have them even be a part of them, you know, documenting them getting arrested or going into, like, you know, that to me is like, it's so integral, because I think that's so important. I mean, not just about the story itself, but about the care and the necessary approach that goes into creating something that is so powerful. And we know the power of media, right? We know one word, right? And we know one statement, if I'm documenting somebody, and or me and my team, and especially me and John are filming someone in their home, and we purposely have a small crew that have been trained with us to actually be mindful of how someone's represented, right? Because think about somebody yielding a camera, or yielding, that's the right word, yielding a camera, going into basically someone's home, you know, with this sensational vantage point, right, of trying to like capture the best story, and you know, and that thought about like that, you know, it taking 7 years to do a film. Yeah, right. No, it does, right? To capture the essence. Again, these stories, again, we can go in and sort of play God, which we do a lot, but the idea is like, how do we be as you know, compassionate and as you know, as part of the fabric as possible. So if I look back and thinking of, you know, my process or my personal stance, and how I was saying how Pull of Gravity as a model is baked into our work as a company, is the film Pull of Gravity is about, you know, it's about incarceration, it's about people returning home and returning to a community. So there's a lot of elements in that, right? There's elements of basically like informing people, you know. And again, this isn't, we cut the camera on, and this is my reality, right? This is straight up like my world, and it was unbeknownst to so many people, and it was unbeknownst to me that so many people didn't know about my world, even the people that judged me, even the people that tried me, the DAs. Like, we're talking about, I mean, you know, again, President Obama, like, we're, you know, to present this to so many people, and for them to have had no idea that in, you know, whenever year it was done, right? But that this is going on, like right now, right? It's very fascinating, because I'm saying this to say is that, you know, you hear these big swipes of just, you know, such and such, you know, with like, I'm sorry, the gentleman, I can swipe over, I'm on my phone. So gentleman Tommy, how you doing, sir? So it made the film, and he was referring to Mike Africa. Like, Mike Africa is my old head. Mike and Chuck, they raised me at Greater Fort, like that. When I think about my time in prison, and so people say, oh, he was denied, like Tommy referenced that they were denied for parole X amount of time. My first thought was how many times Chuck and Mike, or specifically Chuck, but not necessarily Mike so much, went to the hole or was abused by the correctional officers and did such a hard time. It was not an easy bid or time, right? So not that any of the time is easy, but just the fact of like, and people, and so much nuance gets lost in the translation. So your point about like the vantage point of being somebody that has the experience is like, how can we, how can I talk about, yes, incarceration, yes, returning home, but like by and large, growing up and having had adapted as a child to growing up in poverty, right? Right? How do I translate that to people that don't know what that is? They don't understand the fact that I adapted to a way of life that was normal for me, that was okay for me. When I went to prison, I did 8 years in prison, but I did 2 years in juvenile for that. I mean, before that, right? I dropped out of school in the 8th grade after failing how many times? By the time I went to prison, I couldn't read. I always say that reading was an add-on. Like how right? It's such a commonplace thing for us in our, our esoteric lives now, but there's so many people and there's a whole world that we don't even realize that certain things that we think is so, that it means so much in our lives, that people have adapted to a space that doesn't even translate, right? So it's like, how does, for me myself, is just like, I when I see people or panels or things about people about reentry or mass incarceration, and then I see people that just so happen to have went to prison, not to mitigate, like, minimize anybody's experience going to prison, but like, we need to talk about the forces that creates that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about somebody that went to college and committed a crime and went to jail, like, okay, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate that happened, especially if that person was not Black or not brown. If that person is white and a male and committed a crime after having this and then went to jail, they shouldn't be a spokesperson for mass incarceration. Like, let's really rewind this. And I will say that to anyone, because the thought is less about these linear conversations about just incarceration, but all the nuanced shit around it, right? Like, that's where we live in. And again, as a company, we focus in on that. Yes, you want to talk about that, cool, but let's widen that scope a little bit, right? And again, coming from that experience, we can talk directly to that and actually widen that scope a little bit. So that's Michelle's way of saying, wind it up.
Thank you, El. I'm just mindful of time. I mean, I can listen to this.
Okay.
But I feel that, I think what's really interesting about your film is that, the folks that you were representing and sharing their stories, how many of them return back, right, into the system, the conditions in which their families, the communities and their families are living in, and this is Philly, right? It's like I know the Village of the Arts, I know the streets that were shown and depicted in the film. So it is part of like revealing that reality, and thinking of it as not the issue of this particular individual, but how the individual is affected by the systems that they're trying to navigate through. So
I'm sorry, just let me add the last part to that. And then just thinking of that, of our at around 15 people or so that we documented, if I do a last count, we're talking about 9 or 10 people that we showed in that film have been killed.
Yes.
That's one, basically 90% of it was filmed on basically one intersection in North Philly, 10th and Cumberland or 12th and Huntington, those two. We're talking about like that's reality. And these are all
predominantly Black and Latino communities, and men in your film that had lost their lives.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's all of these amazing, beautiful moments, but then there's also these moments of just pain and just anger because of the injustices that exist and we're fighting against. So for Ted and Tommy, and specifically, it's like really about did you have some defining moments and really shifting how the story was being told, right? People think about Move and they have their own perceptions of Move. Where when I saw your film, Tommy, I felt that it was really a story of love and family, you know, and most people don't think about that with Move, and their perceptions, right? And with Larry Krasner, it's like when he was running, it was like all of these different perspectives about this individual. Either people loved him or hated him, and people still either love him or hate him. So I'm interested in how, you know, if you had moments in which you were like, okay, I have to shift the story in this way, because of the challenges of how the people in your film were perceived.
So it was less of an intentional shift and more of I wanted to tell an accurate and complete story. And so much of how Move had been portrayed for just about ever, they were misrepresented and there were half truths. And I wanted to look at what happened. And what I found, there was no definitive account of what happened in 78. And so it required a number of perspectives. It required really trying to understand what was going on. And even though I grew up in Philly, I didn't know much about Move. I didn't really know about Move. Like you hear about Move in Philly, but you don't really hear about Move or about the people. And so it required really digging into what happened. And I just wanted to tell the truth. And part of it was, look, if I tell a story that is soft on Move, doesn't actually do any good, because you can look at it, it's like, oh, it's just, you know, a puff piece. Because ultimately, you can hate Move. You can think they were dirty. You can think they were nasty. They were uncouth. But what happened to them was not okay. And so for me, I wanted to be able to make sure that it was a warts and all story on both sides. Because, like you said, ultimately, it's a love story. It's a love story of a kid who just wants his parents home, like Africa Jr. It's a love story of those parents who were incarcerated for fucking ever and still managed to be wildly in love. And this one's probably a little bit less straightforward or maybe even counterintuitive, but it's also a love story to Philly. And what I mean by that is it's the love story in the sort of way where you love somebody enough to keep arguing with them, where you love them enough to hold up a mirror. And it's like, look, these are the things we're doing wrong. Like, I love Philly. I love my city, but Philly needs to do better. And so it required really looking into and owning and accepting our faults as a city, our shortcomings as a city. And so for me, it was really just about telling the honest story that had not been told.
Thank you, Tommy. I agree in terms of seeing the film, I just want to add. So I live in South Philadelphia, where I was I was taught that Rizzo was our hero, right? So Frank Rizzo, who's present in the film, who plays a very crucial, unfortunate role in Move. And a few blocks away, we have the Rizzo mural, which was just recently painted over. And I was in quarantine from March till June, and 80 plus days inside my house. And I decided to walk out to witness the painting over of this mural, 25 years watching down on us, which is not really a representation of the community. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many like just memories coming through, but also some really points of clarity with the folks that you had interviewed. So Ted, your film Philly Day is going to be shown at Sundance, the first 2 episodes. Can you share a little bit about those defining moments, those shifts, based on how, again, Larry Krasner was perceived or could be perceived by others? What was important to, if there were any shifts, what were they and why?
Yeah, I think in general, for everybody in the film, we kind of the rule that we were trying to live by was just everybody got to be a nuanced person as much as we could, right? Because there's different points of view that are being represented, and you know, everyone has their reasons for, you know, portraying the point of view that they do. And so we thought it was important to make sure that we always gave everybody their reason, their argument, their best foot forward, and kind of leaned into the complexity of that as much as we could. Same thing for Larry. I mean, Larry is, you know, there's people who want to paint him as a devil and people who want to paint him as this savior, and he's neither. And so it was important to try to find the real flawed human person underneath that portrayal that we could bring across to the audience. And it's just more honest. You know, in some ways there's like a very kind of binary form of storytelling that I think we kind of fall into in the major media, and just a lot of stuff where it's like, you're either good or you're bad, and that's it. And, you know, we were very much trying to go beyond that. And that was especially important in our characters who were people who were directly impacted by the system. And, you know, it's a complicated thing because the pressure that, you know, I mean, I just want to commend, first off, just like the bravery and the generosity of the folks who ended up filming with us in the series, because they're putting a lot on the line, you know, by telling their story and being willing to tell their story and to be vulnerable, you know. And I think one of the things that, you know, was a question for us, and I, you know, it's just really just like a question for the system, which is like, you know, there's so much that is demanded of people who have been impacted by the system in terms of, you know, atonement. And, you know, there's this kind of interesting thing where, you know, we kind of realized that in the editing of people's stories, that when we would kind of test it in front of, you know, more general audiences or people, you know, we wanted to see how people would react to, were maybe less familiar with these issues, and we noticed that there was this thing that people really wanted to know who the person was now before they could stand to hear about where they were from. There's an inability to form empathy before people had heard the idea that somebody was trying to make a change or was doing something different or whatever. And it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. One of the things we would talk about is like, you know, kind of like how impacted people and incarcerated people are constantly asked to like put that on display and to perform a certain amount of vulnerability that's really difficult. And ironically, they're asked to do it after being put in a system that teaches them that to survive, they have to not be vulnerable, you know, and then they make their freedom and their social acceptance based on the exact opposite thing that they've been kind of told to unlearn through their time in the system. And so we tried to, you know, put a little bit of that into the series if we could, but at the end of the day, you know, we just tried to, you know, we would talk to everybody and kind of chart with them a little bit of like what their story is, how they got there, what they've learned about themselves. And the goal and the hope was to, you know, take the viewer on that journey with them, to at least, you know, we're not, you know, condoning some of the things that people did, and they're not either, but there's a human reason for why they ended up there. And we wanted people to be able to watch their stories and to be able to see themselves, if they had been in that situation, if they had been forced with the challenges these people were, that they might have made the exact same decisions themselves. So that was what we were trying to, and it was always a conversation. It was always a conversation with the folks who we were portraying, and it was always a conversation with how we arranged their story. And then I think in terms of just like shooting or filming, I guess, I mean, I think, you know, the benefit that we could offer people was really just time and patience and the ability to keep trying to tell the story and to go there and to think about it, which the system doesn't give you. If you go to a parole hearing, you get 10 minutes. You know, you got to go in and you got to like nail this performance, which is crazy. And so, you know, the best thing we could offer was time and just conversation about, you know, what worked for them, and then also just flexibility. That, you know, we might all agree that on such a day we're going to go film this thing or them do this thing, and sometimes it's you get there and you know what, we're just not feeling it today, or it's too hard today, or something has come up, there's no trauma that's come up or whatever. And, you know, as frustrating as it can be because you're scheduling a lot of stuff, you know, and whatever, you just have to roll with it. And that was kind of something that we learned to do. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, I think that what you spoke about in terms of folks who are directly impacted and how, again, it's important to share the story. It's about having courage, but at the same time, it is traumatizing, right? It's like you're remembering that moment over and over and over again. And to what Steve had mentioned, right? How do you follow the lead of the people that you are trying to share their stories, and see when is the right moment, when is not the right moment, and being mindful of that, I think is something that's really important in this work. This is actually a question for everyone. We spoke, and what's very present in the work, about the challenges, the struggles, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. I'm interested in knowing from each and every one of you, what have been the triumphs of sharing these stories, right? What have been the moments of either change or shifts that you've seen and witnessed? Again, some of those things are either made it to the final cut or not, right? I'm interested in hearing that from you all. So whomever can start. Not everyone at once.
So I when I started shooting, I had no idea what was going to happen, none at all. And they, like I said earlier, they had all been denied 7 or 8 times, and I was shooting because after meeting Mike, I found that he was just an incredible person because of, despite all of what he went through, despite all of what he experienced, and the fact that he had literally never seen his parents outside of a prison or never saw them together. He was just a happy, positive person who wanted his family home. And I thought there was something really beautiful about that. And but again, I just started shooting mostly because of him. And I had no idea what would happen. We had no idea of knowing what would happen. I mean, he was doing the work, the team around him were doing things. Larry, we had no idea that Larry would be elected, and so all these things had to sort of fall in line. And to be around, to have gotten to know him and his parents and the rest of the move, and to be there when they got out was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And it wasn't the same as going to Rikers, but I almost got arrested a number of times recording because Pennsylvania does not like cameras on prison grounds at all. I got chased, like it was all sorts of things. And so, but there was no way I couldn't capture those moments. There's no way I couldn't be there for them. And so to see these people reunited, it was euphoric. And it's also the sort of thing, like as you're watching the movie, I'm sort of giving it away, I mean, but it's real life. As we watch this movie, we've seen this story or these types of stories, and there's this sense of you almost don't want to allow yourself to hope that it's going to happen in the end, because you're setting yourself up for failure. Because many times these movies, these stories, they don't have happy endings. They don't, because there are so many things that are outside of our control. There's so many situations that are just set up for failure. And so, like, the 10 minutes where you have to go in and do the song and dance or whatever it may be. And so to sort of see all of that, to see love, was just incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And as a quick aside, Mike was pushing on so many things, and to get the city council, which was a big thing that he was pushing on himself, to get them to apologize for what happened in 1985 was a giant thing. And it happened large in part because of a new city council member and him and having a conversation and his pushing and all that. But I do want to say one thing that was surprising is that while that did happen, Mayor Kinney chose to not be a part of it. And so it was very specifically city council apologized. Mayor Kinney wanted nothing to do with it. But just the fact that they were able to get out and Mike was able to have his family and they were able to spend time with their kids and their grandkids and all of that was just utterly surprising and amazing and affirming in a lot of ways. and then life affirming, not about film, because there are things far more important than film.
Thank you, Tommy, for that. You know, Michelle, this was, took me some time to answer your question about triumphs, because Tommy, what you were saying about happy endings, like these stories, a lot of these don't have happy endings. We feel, Alex and I both feel like we're still not, our story hasn't ended yet. It's still continuing, and we even felt that way when we were cutting the film. So to think about triumphs feels a little bit bittersweet. But I guess one thing that I will bring up is this feeling at the premiere, where I had my father, who was formerly undocumented, with the rest of my family watching the film. And at the end, all these young undocumented people come up on stage to speak about the film. They were in the film, and now, you know, they're up on stage. And just this feeling that when he was their age and was undocumented, he didn't have this kind of movement. And to kind of call attention to that is something that I feel like is a triumph of the film, to be able to show young people, young undocumented people, as sophisticated political strategists. It's just such a different way of thinking and speaking about immigrants in mainstream media. And so kind of that feeling of intervention in that story, that dominant story, I guess I would call that a triumph, even though we're still trying to bring Claudia home, you know, and still working the story, really.
Yeah, I really was struck by what you were saying, Tommy. Also, it reminded me of this, and what you're saying, Christina. It's sort of these the unseen narratives, right? That play out, that people really need to bear witness to, and it reminds me a lot of like these memories of being in so many rooms where people are continually asking, like, well, what does racial justice look like? Where are all the good cops, right? Like, what does hope even look like? How can we, just simple everyday people, challenge an institution as powerful as the NYPD? You know, impossible, right? And the fact that like, it's not a triumph of the film necessarily, but the triumph of these individual cops, right? These active duty whistleblower cops who, for the first time in the history of the NYPD, decided to speak out and call out the department as they were showing up to work every day, right? In their free time, out of uniform, of course. But, you know, it's like, and the chance to sort of bear witness to that and document that process of unfoldment, right? That like, during the very moment that Eric Garner was murdered for selling loose cigarettes in New York City, these cops had already been investing years of effort into challenging the structures of racism and discriminatory practice in the NYPD from the inside. And on the outside, there were families who had been continuously trying to speak to the media, get any journalist to pay attention to their individual story. And, you know, it was just so, like, so deeply like upsetting, but also inspiring at the same time, that like, you know, here was evidence of hope, that like there are people out there taking these risks, making efforts, you know, everyday individuals from the inside and the outside, because these are people who know that radical change can happen, because they know and feel in their bones it has to. We have no choice. And so I feel like a triumph is like, you know, what all of you are doing is like this opportunity to lift the narrative of disruptors within systems, right? I mean, because this is all systemic. These problems are all systemic problems, you know. Our criminal justice system, our policing, prosecutors, cops, they are prone to make more mistakes and cause more harm than fix problems and protect the public. And we have to come to terms with that. You know, it's like that the abolitionist Ruth Wilson has this line I saw recently where she's like the absence of slavery does not mean freedom, right? Because of how debt and social control and economic control and through policing and our justice system are disrupting lives and sending young people through this Orwellian nightmare of our criminal justice system. And so this act like of bringing a camera to document, like, you know, like you're saying, Ted, right? These very three-dimensional, real people who are showing up to do the hard work behind the scenes and to try and shake things up, you know, and challenge the status quo. Like, I think that's a triumph story that we can't tell enough, especially with a group like this who really understands how much sort of the value of nuanced storytelling is important, that our, like, quote unquote protagonists are fallible, that, you know, they are not perfect individuals, and in that sense they mirror us, right, and can maybe shake up our own sense of complacency.
I'll just jump in. I think this is like double judge. I'm just jumping in, right? So you know, I think it was Ted that mentioned, like, you know, he was referring to Krasner, and like saying that, you know, he was either evil or not evil, and he's neither, right? Or I can't remember your quote exactly. And I'm not saying anything toward Krasner against him. I don't, you know, but I think that's a very interesting piece. And I feel like a lot of, not only if you really boil it down, part of the reason why I feel that we are as a society, as a people, you know, are in the condition that we're in, is that patriarchal this or that, super, you know, super binary kind of way of looking at success or not. And I feel like every time, every day, you know, I can look at different, you know, use myself as an example of triumph, and like thinking of like, like one mistake, you know, one, like my life personally is so fragile. And again, so many people are like that, and I'm not any kind of exception that way at all. But that's the thing, right? As fragile of an existence, that not only of being human, but just systemically what I represent, just for not only living and breathing, and God forbid being a father and a husband, right? And doing everything I can to protect my family. But besides that, to be able to be a mouthpiece and actually, create a company to basically amplify stories in a very thoughtful way, and to empower other people and train. I mean, we set up a training program called Shooters, which a number of you probably will get a call from somebody about, you know, potentially speaking with our Shooters crew. You know, Shooters is set up. Shooters Narrative Shift is an organization that my partner John and I set up to train people, men and
Sign me
women
up.
coming. You're already up. Let me just tell you, you know, we train. So basically, using my experience as a model, and my mentor Glenn Holston, who came to prison and taught me film at Greater Ford Prison for 6 years. Glenn Holston's a very well-known filmmaker in Philadelphia that doesn't look like me, nothing like me, but seen the importance and the human in me. And I think that as a model as itself, we use that in my own experiences as a model to actually then leverage other mentors to actually train people, men and women coming home from prison, teaching them film and networking skills. With that said, triumphs, I mean, we're all around triumphs, right? And again, our triumphs need triumphs, right? So it's like, there's no straight lines in nature. And the only way I can look at that is almost just bringing reference to that fact. I feel like, you know, I'm on panels all the time, and people would ask, what was that one moment when you decided, like, you mean right now? Like, right, like in a day, I go from here to there, you know, like, and then COVID, oh, forget about it. It's all over the place, right? It's like no straight lines normally, and right now it's even worse. So triumphs is like, you know, this is an unnatural fight, because our condition is not natural. The environments people are living in and forced into is not natural, and is not made for human consumption. So I don't know if there's going to be an ultimate triumph. I feel like getting up every day and still having the ability and to partner with amazing people in the fight to actually keep it going, and it is a triumph. And I think despite all of the things that exist that gives people the gall to rush the U.S. Capitol to disrupt like that. Like, the fact that we can have this conversation, and even Black Star can initiate these conversations, I think are triumphs despite it all, right? And I seen a quote
Absolutely.
earlier today that says there are Black people in the future, right? Like that triumphs. I mean, we're built out of that, right? Like, and again, our, you know, even in our inequities, I feel like we have to see those as all type possibilities.
I'm
So
going to
thank you.
jump in. I'm going to jump in.
No,
Thank
dude,
you,
I
Al.
was stopping. I timed you out, Michelle.
Well, we're 5 minutes behind already, but I just wanted to give a moment for Ted to share, you know, to have a quick response to that question.
Sure. Yeah, I can say quickly. I mean, you know, we premiered tomorrow, so so no one's seen it yet. But
Please tune in. Yes.
So it's hard to say what's going to come out of that. I mean, I guess I can say that so far, the folks who are in the series who have been able to see it, so far we've gotten the compliment that everybody feels like their portrayal was good and fair, and you know, there was, you know, we didn't have any problems there. So I see that as a triumph. But I think even just the experiment of making the series, whether or not we did a good job with it, I think even just the fact that we were able to get the kind of access that we did, you know, like behind such an opaque governmental institution. The ACLU often calls the prosecutor's office the black box of the criminal justice system. They have, you know, more power and authority than almost any other institution over the daily lives of people, and yet you never get to see what goes on inside. Nobody knows how their decisions get made. Nobody knows why they do what they do. So to even to get in there and to be able to create this portrait kind of feels like a triumph. So I can say I you know, feel good about that.
Thank you so much. You know, I think ending on triumphs, whether they're large or small, are those moments that keep us going, right? I mean, we understand what the struggle is. We understand what the issues are at play. What we have to continue to fight for. And I think that because this is work that's long run, you know, it's so important to hold on to those moments. So that's why I wanted to really end our conversation with that point. I just want to just thank you all, not just for being in this panel, but for the work that you're doing as truth tellers, as storytellers, and doing this with dignity and respect with the people that you are sharing their stories and having us all learn from them and through your lens. So thank you so much. Thanks to Black Star for creating and producing this great conversation, to Sundance also for supporting this. Tune in for Philly DA, those first 2 episodes coming up actually tomorrow, I believe, right, is when it premieres. And check out everyone else and their amazing work and support them, please. So thank you so much and have an amazing day. Take care.
Michelle, thank you as well.
Thank you, Michelle.